What's going on, guys? We got to talk about the Seattle office market and the rest of the real estate market in Seattle because it's something that I've never seen before. Now, we've been talking a lot about San Francisco real estate and how bad the office demand in San Francisco is, but Seattle's worse. We're seeing dozens and dozens of literally empty skyscrapers. You look at the Seattle skyline, most of that stuff is pretty empty. And go to Seattle, overall, even now, it's still a pretty decent city. Seattle surprisingly isn't having like the same amount of outflow compared to places like San Francisco and Oakland. And that's because Seattle, yes, they have a large homeless population. And yes, the city is still not as great compared to many other cities around the world. But still, though, it's still decently clean in a lot of areas. And a lot of residents still like to live in Seattle, but at this point, we're seeing a lot of office demand being at an all-time low. Seattle's known for tech, right? Amazon is here, but now even super iconic buildings like the Smith Tower is now going up for auction because guess what? Office demand is super duper low. In fact, we're seeing this situation happening in many of the US cities, except like places like Miami, Tampa, stuff like that. But you get the idea. Demand for Seattle office space is only 21% of the normal number. That's not great. Imagine every single few days you always get like 100 tenants coming in. Now you're only getting about 20 to 21 tenants. That just shows you how low the demand is. We're also seeing a lot of new construction office buildings suddenly being canceled. There's still a lot of demand for apartments and condos, but when it comes to office buildings, it's at an all-time low. And now we're also seeing a lot of big pushes of a lot of these office buildings, these massive giants being turned into residential and apartments, which might actually cause a massive decline in the real estate value. Check this out. Seattle office space demand is the lowest among US cities. I mean, imagine your office demand is worse than San Francisco. That just shows you how bad it is. And the demand is super low. We're seeing massive drops, right? Shows that Seattle experienced the greatest quarterly decline in demand for office space with a 43% drop quarter over quarter and a 52% whopping drop year over year. But if you go to places like Miami, office demand is at an all-time high. They're still building office skyscrapers and Miami's vacancy is less than 8%. Whereas Seattle is closing in on more like 20% and even higher. We're seeing San Francisco at 35, Oakland at 37, and these numbers are going to be higher and higher, especially for these West Coast Pacific cities. And this is not great. We're seeing Seattle's decline rising, right? Many of the big tech companies here in Seattle are now moving themselves online. We're seeing many of these guys moving outside of the Seattle location because, frankly, these massive office towers are not cheap to maintain. If you put yourself in the middle of downtown Seattle, there's literally skyscrapers everywhere. And these rooms, like I said, are very, very expensive. And we're seeing a lot of rich people simply leaving Seattle, going to other places, or just downgrading the office, downsizing it. And many startups just simply don't want to get an office. Startups nowadays don't have to move to Seattle. They don't have to move to places like San Francisco. A lot of these places have huge homeless populations, and the quality of life just isn't as worth it as before. Like before the pandemic, you have a company, you have a startup, you better get yourself to one of these big tech cities. But now it's totally different. You don't have to do that anymore. So this is why Seattle office space is the worst in the entire USA. And meet some of the Seattle office buildings that will probably be turning into apartments. Now, this is the Smith Tower that's already been proposed. This is like the existing floor plan, which is kind of like what an office looks like, but they're transforming this to like just 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and studios, which personally I think is pretty cool. But also remember one thing, one of the reasons why Oakland rents actually went down 7.2% in just a few months is because of insane amounts of overbuilding, which is causing a huge crash in Oakland's rental market. Same thing's happening in Seattle. Everywhere now is saying, oh, Seattle's residential real estate is still somewhat strong. Condo prices are down 20%, but they seem to have stabilized. Rents are still pretty insane. But remember, once they start implementing a lot of these massive conversions, it's over. Because some of these buildings have like 300,000, 500,000, even a million square footage of space a pop. And whole entire buildings like these being turned to residential will probably spark a massive crash in the rental market. And of course, with this high interest rate market and also people buying these properties in these major cities are already taking massive hits. They can't take another rental hit because many of these units, they're barely alive, they're barely functioning, they're barely scraping by so they don't go to the foreclosure route because rents are somewhat steady. So places like Seattle, if you overbuild like this, rents are going to go down, which is great for renters, right? It's great for home buyers. But for the existing guys, we're going to be seeing even more foreclosures, and that's what's happening. Remember, Seattle's construction is still pretty hot overall. You're seeing places like a lot of these new construction projects coming in and massive skyscrapers, but also keep in mind that many of these projects are having a lot of difficulties in selling, with a lot of them having like 30% empty, 40% empty, or like 50% empty. And a lot of these luxury Seattle condos are not being sold. Head over towards Seattle just for a little bit with me, and you probably will see some of these housing prices and condo prices have dropped down, okay? And if you go to like the downtown area, some of the good parts, you do see some of these prices are way lower than before. Like, for example, this unit here, right? $700,000, new construction, 1 bed, 1 bath. You would not get a unit like this back in old days. This was a unit that was almost $1 million, but look at how good this unit is for what you're paying. In my opinion, $710, you could probably negotiate and get that down even more. This is actually a pretty nice 1 bedroom with fantastic views of the whole city, and you get a new unit. I'll probably buy something like this if I was in Seattle. You even get like a little free garage space. And you do see many of these condo units in Seattle are dropping down more and more in price. So it's going to be a really weird market because, like I said before, the feds are not decreasing rates at all. In fact, the feds are even thinking about hiking rates even more. Guess what? Fun fact, inflation rates are not going down. Inflation numbers are actually going up. In fact, we're probably heading towards 4.4%, according to the latest Michigan report. So these are all really scary stuff. And even Jeff Bezos is kind of sick of Seattle. Seattle is still a pretty decent city in my opinion. It still has a lot of crazy shenanigans, but not as bad as the Bay Area. But even Bezos, these super wealthy individuals, are kind of tired of a lot of these West Coast cities. And they're pretty much leaving Seattle for literally Miami, which is basically where everyone is going recently. Miami housing prices are really steady. It's deemed and dubbed the Wall Street of the South. And we're seeing office buildings in Miami selling for very high prices. And Bezos leaves Seattle for Miami after nearly 30 years of founding Amazon. That's some wild stuff. Now Miami has a huge amount of clientele of just simply rich people. You got famous people like Messi's living there. You got Jeff Bezos. You got your average typical multimillionaire living there. And of course, you're also getting Seattle's homelessness getting out of control. I think a lot of wealthy individuals and a lot of big companies just don't really want to headquarter themselves in a place where there's constant complaints of homeless encampments. Obviously, the city just doesn't really have the budget or any sort of strength to actually manage these crises. And people are just leaving, all right? People are just kind of sick and tired of it. Same thing what's happening in the Bay Area. I talk about the Bay Area all the time. People want big changes, but the city never really gives out big changes. And it's always going to probably stay like this. And we're going to be seeing a big shift. Certain American cities are going to be going downhill the next decade, and certain American cities will prosper, do extremely well. It's a really, really odd situation that we're in, but this is what it is. Thanks for watching, guys, and comment below. See you later.